Hey Power People, welcome to Renewable Rides, powered by VECKTA. I'm Gareth Evans, the CEO and founder.
And I'm Dan Roberts, head of sales. In each episode, we'll uncover the latest trends, learnings, challenges, and triumphs relating to the energy transition, on-site energy, and sustainability through the experiences of our inspiring guests and team here at VECKTA.
So get ready for an exhilarating adventure into the fast-paced world of challenging limits, adapting purposefully, and empowering co-creation to accelerate the energy transition with those that are on a mission to create a more resilient, profitable, sustainable, and thriving energy future. So let's go. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Renewable Rides. Dan and I are super excited today to be joined by Eoghan Quinn. Eoghan Quinn is a longtime friend, former colleague over at Worley, and he's an absolute animal. He's a lot of fun. He's got a huge amount of knowledge in the energy transition, and he truly knows how to challenge limits and integrate work and life. And that's what it's all about here at Renewable Rides. So looking forward to getting into this today, Eoghan.
Thanks for having me, Gareth and Dan. Gareth, good to see you again and get involved with something like this. Delighted to spend the afternoon here in sunny Edinburgh. Walking through some of the lessons learned from the industry.
That's great. Well, we always start off, Eoghan, with what are you passionate about personally and professionally?
Yeah. So, where do you begin? Look, personally, I suppose it's probably an easier element. Always been involved in the outdoor sports, similar to yourself, Gareth. I suppose from a young age, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and it always encouraged me to get out and I suppose challenge myself, whether it was running, cycling, kite surfing, and I've had the fortunate, I suppose, being in a fortunate position to travel with my work and in the renewable space internationally. And I always found the best way to get to know people was by, I suppose, adapting to the sports that were around you. So whether it was surfing, kite surfing, and cycling, as I said. So yeah, that's on the personal side. I have a young son. He's 2 years of age, and my wife Carrie, she's very, very active as well. So we try to get out and about as much as we possibly can here in Scotland, as well as doing some hiking. On the professional side, I started out in the renewable energy sector, or my career started out in renewables from day dot. Those growing up, I remember being quite young and my father passing me the newspaper every morning, getting me to read different things that he thought I might find interesting. And there was one gentleman, his name is Eddie O'Connor. And I was very young, and Eddie is the founder of Mainstream Renewables. Eddie was always in the news, and he was building wind farms, and these things looked completely, they look mad. They're relatively small in today's comparison, but it was about breaking and challenging the norm of what we currently perceived as being normal. And Eddie certainly did that. And I suppose that set me on a different journey. I wanted to get involved in renewables. I wanted to make an impact from an environmental perspective. I kicked off my renewable journey in that light. I started out in wave and tidal energy, and then realized the challenges associated with that, and then broke out into more large-scale renewable generation, and then looking at the funds and the finance associated with it, debt financing and VC funding. And then, of course, on the delivery side, so working more along the lines of large-scale delivery, and constantly at the same time looking at, going back to that element with Eddie O'Connor, was, breaking the norm. So looking at how things could be improved, how do things become more, how do you procure more efficiently? How do you drive that cost down? And also how do you continuously to be evolving that cutting edge of innovation? So I remember being starting out in green hydrogen in 2016, and I now look at it, and it's in every single headline of the newspaper. There's lots of talk, but we've yet to see bigger plans being developed, but that'll come in time. But yeah, so look, I suppose the whole energy domain and what we're seeing right now, this transition, which will take years, is really capturing my interest.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you've got a really interesting journey to have gotten to this point, Eoghan. Do you want to just describe, where you grew up, the values you grew up with, some of your adventures along the way, and how you dealt with growing up with diabetes and what that sort of did for you, whether good, bad, or ugly?
Yeah, I know. Happy to do so. I know I've shared these stories with you, Gareth, in the early hours of the morning. So, yeah, look, I suppose as I mentioned, being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, it was you're walking into the unknown. It kind of from a young age, I always felt I was having to validate myself, prove myself to myself. I felt like I had a clink in my own armor. And yeah, look, it drove me to, raise further awareness for people with type 1 diabetes, particularly later on in life. I suppose we put challenges in front of ourselves that we wanted to work as a team, to try tackle and overcome. When I was quite young, I went to university in 17. At 17, I went to university overseas, left home, left the comforts of what my support network was, and went out having type 1, and tried to learn about myself and how I best, evolve in that mentality of having type 1 diabetes. And I suppose the learnings I took along the way helped me both in my professional sense, but also helped me challenge. It's amazing, you can't learn this in school. It was about how you get to know yourself the best. It was only mixing sport and having that ability to challenge myself along with having type 1 diabetes. It was kind of like this catalyst. And I remember one Christmas, I was catching up with my brother and a few friends, and we're talking about what was happening in the West Bank. And at the time, there was a lot of trouble in the West Bank, particularly in Gaza. And it was something that resonated with me was, imagine you relied heavily on a medical or medicine, and you were stuck in Gaza and you didn't have access to that medicine. And I remember traveling back to university just after Christmas, and I was thinking, if I was a diabetic, what was my life expectancy? So I started looking this up, and I was thinking, okay, your life expectancy is actually seriously impacted in this environment. And then I thought, we were discussing it further with my brother and a few friends. We said, well, why don't we look at bringing humanitarian aid over in an apolitical environment? So we looked at driving a van and bringing insulin over, and got in touch with a number of the nations along the way. And then we said, look, that's too easy. Anyone can drive a van. We need to show how close Gaza is to Ireland. So we said, well, why don't we, I didn't own a bicycle at the time. Why don't we buy a few bikes and cycle to Gaza, send the van ahead, which was acting as an ambulance full of medicine every day. And look, it was one of those snowball, that one conversation is after linking into multiple other challenges that we've got involved with then soon after. So we set off on the journey in the summertime. We were trained for around 9 months. We headed off. We got sponsorship of some great, Garmin, Shimano. We got big sponsors on board. We got world leaders to back us, to welcome us. We got backing of various different elements of the UN. We headed on our way, and it was one of those trips that, look, you learn an awful lot about yourself because you're on the bike for 160 miles a day for 40 days. You learn about yourself. You learn that you can't singly do it. You relied heavily on a team. We didn't make it through every day because without the team that we had, not only supporting each other on the road, but also going ahead, setting up camp, and also the team behind the scenes. And it was that point you realized, you're looking on a map and you're looking at how big Ireland is, and then you look at how far away Gaza is and how much you can achieve in that team dynamic and working heavily as relying on one another. And everyone has their dips. Everyone has their, the endorphins kick in and you come crashing down, and it was about picking each other up along the way. And you only remember the good days in scenarios, but interestingly enough, the bad days you also really remember. Like I remember having my blood sugar going really low, and I suppose we had ran out of water, and coming around in a bedouin camp, and a bedouin camp is in complete isolation. And I remember drinking the water that they were giving me, thinking, I'm going to be so sick, but I need to get something into me. And so it was really interesting, a really interesting experience. One that I don't think I could ever replicate, but it was certainly something that gave me an excitement in the belly that I wanted to chase after further things. A few years later, we did something very similar. We went from Melbourne to Sydney on our bicycles. We did 250k a day. We raised money for Aboriginal healthcare and type 1 diabetes as well. We did it. We knocked out 250k in 4 days straight, arriving into Sydney. That was an incredible journey. At the height of summer in Australia, there was forest fires. There was fires actually. We were arriving into villages that were just completely being burnt out. Wow. I suppose that was was kind of that point. You're thinking 1.5, can we achieve it? And it's when you put yourself in that uncomfortable environment, you start to really appreciate, and you start to, I suppose, you start to become more aware of the things around you. We've done a few other challenges along the way. But I suppose it's understanding that environment. I couldn't do it on my own. There's no way. I have a lot of appreciation and respect for individual athletes that can do this. But behind the scenes, there is a team. And whether you're looking at the tennis, you're looking at the golf, there's a team. And they might be at the forefront and they're on the camera, but there's a team there. And it's about understanding how that team works and having an incredible one that is a driving force towards the finish line.
That's really awesome, Owen. Really appreciate you sharing those stories. One of the things that you said within there that really resonated with me was how close Ireland and Gaza are, and really how close we all are linked in the world. That combined with the whole team aspect, maybe you can share a bit about how those are linked to the energy sector and how the energy, everybody's connected and it requires a team. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I suppose the reason why I enjoyed using that example with the cycle that we did, one thing that came through during that journey was, look, we met incredible people along the way, had a similar mindset to what we wanted to achieve. And when you break back what my current role of recent has been involved in, is delivering large-scale renewable projects and working with supply chains globally. Look, everyone's pushing in the same direction. And when you look at what you're seeing in the Nordics right now, you're seeing a rise of renewable hydrogen projects starting to get kicked off. In the UK, for instance, you're getting a drive in large-scale offshore wind. What we've seen is we're hiring a lot of people that are coming out of university, and they've just this willingness to drive towards that finish line. It's not about titles. It's not about the company itself. It's about the values. It's about the impact, and it's about creating an environment for their children's children. And that is some of the elements that are really coming out. And I suppose I'm very, very fortunate to have an involvement with. And there are days there where there are days of recent. I'm currently currently changing up roles and jobs at the moment, so I'm having a kind of a reflective period right now.
Great.
But it's funny, there hasn't been a period of time where I haven't been put in an environment where I'm being stressed or I'm not challenging myself. So I'm very, very fortunate to be in that. The renewable energy market, the energy transition space, although we hear that it's not moving fast enough, it's happening. It will happen. It's going to take time. Things are from project level are moving very, very fast. For instance, we are in my previous role, we were stuck with the idea of delivering projects and the lack of available personnel to make things happen. Mm-hmm. It was very, very difficult. And it was an interesting one where you're having to think differently. You're having to say, okay, this project might be in Norway. This project might be in the UK, but let's look at how we apply the solutions to this globally. So let's look at how we bring low cost centers in India on board to really be the driving force of the delivery of these projects. How do we replicate what we've already done in Australia to deliver the project in the UK? The only difference is the time, the time in which the people are working. And I suppose, Dan, going back to your point there, was having people driving the same mentality, driving to the finish line, having an understanding of the values of the project or the challenges. We, in certain circumstances, created a 24-hour clock of delivery. And that is one of the benefits of working with a global business. The ability to have a turnaround where while we're sleeping, the project is still moving forward.
Yeah. I think what I love about all your stories, Eoghan, is there's huge parallels and learnings from physical challenges and what we're all going through in the energy transition and building businesses and projects. And it's that bumpy road, it's having the grit, it's having the resilience, it's having the ability to go, I've kind of been there, seen it before in a completely different form, and it's going to work out. Yeah. We just need to dig deep. We need to work together. And I think it's awesome kind of seeing those stories, because it does make you realize, doesn't it, that we can get through it, and we might have to drink some crappy water, and we might have some unfortunate consequences of that. But coming out the other side, it'll all have been worth it.
No, you're right. You're dead right. Actually, in certain circumstances or certain scenarios, you assume big energy companies know what they're doing. You assume big developers know what they're doing. You assume the banks know what they're doing. In this environment with renewables, look, to a certain extent, we've seen it already. There's an unknown. There's a complete unknown. But it's the ability of getting everyone on the same page. And once everyone's on the same page, going back to that team mentality, you can drive towards what potentially could be possible. We did a challenge, Garrett, that you're well aware of. We kite surfed from France to Ireland. And it was one of those things where we raised a lot of money. We raised a lot of money for charity. It was for type 1 diabetes again. And can this even happen? And you break down the elephant into smaller chunks, and you think, okay, I can do this. And we got the right team here, and we break down the fuel, what we need, and we overcome the uncertainty of the weather. Well, yeah, look, this is possible. And you then have the element of risk. You've got to mitigate that risk so no one is in a situation where, from a health and safety perspective, and you target all the elements. You do the strategy, you build it, and then you drive it forward. And it can be a success, and it was a success. So there's nothing that's insurmountable right now. We're at a point where we're looking around the globe. You're seeing headlines. It's the hottest year. It's the hottest month in history, globally. So we've completely missed 1.5. It's about how do we fast track in the next 5 years our commitments going forward.
And so on that front, what's exciting you most when you look at the landscape? What kind of gets you most jacked in terms of progress or new tech or opportunity?
Look, what I love is what it's great to see is you would have seen this as well, Gareth. 10 years ago, I felt I was a lone voice in a room, trying to convince my peers and upper management, whatever it might have been in the finance space, that this is important to look at. There's a business case here. There's an NPV. There's an IRR that's attractive. Now, the projects are being considered. It's just finding the right project. But I'm also, so there's a light on it, and that's great, because the wind is in our sails finally. What I think is also really exciting is supply chain is starting to really catch up. You're starting to see bigger projects of complexity come online. It's not necessarily just an OEM driven approach. It's one where it takes a number of the different parallels of the universe or renewable energy or energy sector to work in unison. So, if you look at the trilemma, it's funding, it's development expertise, and it's delivery expertise. So they're coming together and they're leveraging the knowledge that they have from the oil and gas space, from the mining space. The last element I think that's really exciting to see is there's a switch. There's a switch being flicked. We're starting to see big, large international companies that have experience in delivering projects of incredible magnitude and size move confidently into this space. But they're not doing it on their own. They're reaching out for in a collaborative manner. And that's what it's going to take moving into this new space of the energy transition. That mentality of building it, operating it solely on your own. This needs to be done in a collaborative manner. And I think that's actually, for me, that's really exciting, because with collaboration, it allows us to jump a shadow. And so it's exciting. One worry is the scale of planning. How do we fast track that planning challenge? Mm-hmm. And it's not just in the UK, it's not just in the US, it's globally. We're seeing it right across the board. We were executing projects in 22 different countries, and all of which were up against the challenge of planning. How do we fast track that? So that's not what I want to answer today on today's podcast, but it is certainly one that has slowed the process and progress that we potentially could achieve.
So given that we are largely in the energy transition, still moving into the unknown a bit, and the inertia of the status quo is pretty strong. What are some of the strategies that you found successful in getting larger organizations to move in this direction?
Well, yeah, look, I suppose I can talk about my own scars in having worked with Worley. We Gareth, myself, and a few others, we looked at we looked at how we, I suppose, bring the business case forward. And also it's the business case, but also there's the potential. And then there's looking at transitioning of workforce and diversifying. So I think what we were faced with is a lot different to what companies now are faced with. We were moving before the shareholders wanted us to move. We were moving in advance of that. So we were having to articulate something that there was a lot of assumptions made, and there was so we looked at battery storage. We looked at solar from a large scale generation perspective, concentrated. We looked at offshore wind, and that was one that I was certainly driving. So having moved from Australia back over to Europe, was looking at, okay, I've got to create a parallel for what we currently deliver, and that's, we wanted to look at projects that were less commoditized and that had that term complexity involved in it, and they had to be large scale. So we wanted to look at how we convert our capability from the oil and gas at large scale over to complex renewable projects. And unfortunately, at the time, there weren't many, and we were an unknown brand moving into the space. But what we did do is we looked at leveraging our global footprint. So Worley, at the time, we're in roughly 34 countries. We were then Worley Parsons, and we looked at going into countries that the competitive and mature market of Europe were wanting to break into. So we looked at the US East Coast and we said, okay, we can be a known brand that can help mitigate your risk of breaking into a new market. And that's what we did. We did that. We set it up. We drove it. And fortunately, there is a great entrepreneurial mentality in Worley that helped drive that forward. And we were very, very fortunate to get the first few renewable offshore wind projects up and running in the US. And then we leveraged that. I'm not going to say cookie cut it because there's a lot of differences between different markets, but we tried to get the same knowledge and the same approach. And we applied it into the APAC market, where we're very, very strong from a footing perspective. And now we're delivering projects right now globally across a number of different regions. So Taiwan, South Korea, US East Coast, moving into South America, and also Canada, as well as Europe. So that was a very fortunate strategy that played out over time. It didn't happen overnight, but it allowed us to fundamentally put what we knew into practice and allowed us to communicate with strength how we mitigate the risks of moving into the unknown. It goes back to the point I mentioned earlier. These energy companies or developers or funds, finance, whatever it might be, there's a number of assumptions that they have to take on board. And it's about how you can help mitigate that assumption, provide strength, and I suppose help them get to what we perceive to be as the end goal.
Really good point.
And in terms of, you've been exposed to a lot of different technologies, Eoghan. If you looking forward, what technology, like if you could be any technology, what would it be? Why? Like, what are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, geez. God, there's look, right now I'm thinking, it's if you break down the projects that I've been involved in executing over the last while, you're seeing the rise. There's a number of different pillars. We're kind of starting to evolve. We know offshore wind is we know it's proven. It's getting bigger. It's fantastic. The challenge for offshore wind is going to be the supply chain, boats, installation. It's going to be difficult. So the technology there is relatively proven. The hydrogen space, we're going to see a big move in the hydrogen space over the next while. We know the OEMs are starting to come in. Further OEMs are starting to come online. You see the likes of the Indian market starting to do mega factories now, breaking into it. That's exciting. That's really, really exciting because we're executing the likes of H2 Green Steel. We've brought on board a number of other, I suppose, incredibly large scale projects. They're moving away from the 50 megawatt. They're moving up to the gigawatts, which is exciting. Yeah. I suppose, look, if I was one that's going to solve the challenges that we have right now, it's going to be the transmission market. The transmission market is one where we've gone down the route of being decentralized for a lot of the commitments of, say, the data centers, which is great. But I'm thinking large scale generation, we're going to start seeing an interplay between countries. And you're seeing that already as countries come in to make global pacts. And it's how we roll that out. Will there be further innovation into the transmission sector? I think there will be. You're seeing the share of energy generation between Germany, Poland come online. You're seeing Norway and the Netherlands come online. You're already seeing plans for further development from Ireland to France. And again, this is constantly evolving. We just assume this is a cable. It's not. There's more to it than that. Mm-hmm. So it's about how you cool it, how you make it most efficient so you reduce the losses. The technology from a generation perspective will always evolve, and it will continue to evolve. It might be the case SMR becomes the favorite technology of the month in a few years' time. But the one thing it will all need is that interconnect, that transmission. So I think that's one where I would be a watchful eye on it. And we've got to make sure that we challenge the supply chain, that it's not just a monopoly out there. that we put enough pressure that, it's advancing at the level that it needs to advance in order for us to meet our commitments.
Super interesting point. I haven't actually heard anyone talk about transmission as being kind of the technology they'd like to see shift or need to see shift. And it makes a lot of sense. I think in our world of distributed energy, we think about we need to distribute it, but we need to distribute it in quite a local sense.
Yep.
I think it's very interesting thinking on that very macro scale of how do we actually ensure sovereignty and energy security and
massively. Yeah. No, absolutely. There's a few companies out there that we'd spoken to in the past that are looking at, I suppose, advancing this from a cutting edge perspective. That cooling element. How do you manufacture it at large scale, reduce the losses? Because there's considerable amount of losses involved in large scale generation and large scale export. So, there's a few companies out there that are cutting edge, and I know they're on the market right now looking at further investment and trying to roll it out. But it's one that I think over the next 5 years we're going to see big changes. And look, when that happens, then we then start looking at projects like Sun Cable in Australia, where they're using Australia's incredible environment from a renewable perspective and taking that energy up into a significant demand center. Australia is not it's a big country, but it's not heavily populated. So, it's got incredible resources and the ability to capture that and take it into a highly dense environment, into whether it's parts of the APAC market. It's going to be incredible. So technology needs to come online. I think it needs to advance further, reduce those losses. And then it's the project. Is it bankable? I don't know what a project of that scale is yet, but it certainly has significant potential. So,
Oh, and any one of the things we'd love to ask our guests is any favorite quotes that either drive you personally or have resonated with you professionally?
Look, it's one where it's one that I suppose reflect on when things get tough. You've got to enjoy being in a very uncomfortable situation, because if you are, you're very, very fortunate. And over the years, I didn't necessarily appreciate it until there's moments like where you're in between starting a new role, you start reflecting and you're thinking, wow, look at what we've achieved in such a small period of time. And that only happens when your back is against the wall and you're looking for a solution. And I'm not saying every solution is going to solve the problem, but look, I think this is one that sits well with me. Whether it's on the personal side of doing challenges, or it's on the professional side. And look, I've been involved in doing startups, building startups within organizations. The most recent one with Worley. And you've got to constantly have a thick skin. You've got to look for the new answer. You've got to pick yourself up. It's uncomfortable. It's unknown. You're really, really, you're challenging yourself. The other one I heard, I was told, it was a couple of years back. Everyone is listening to you. And although you think they're not, people are listening to you. So, it's important to have, understand where you want to get to, because when you start to speak, people will listen. And when people listen, you want to drive, your conversation and your outputs in a way that helps you and the others get to where you need to get to. And look, when you get into an uncomfortable situation or uncomfortable environment, you start to second guess yourself. And when you second guess yourself, you start to maybe verbalize that. People listen to that. And it's good to talk about it, but at the same time, it's good also to remain a consistent path going forward, because you're going through ground that hasn't been trodden on before. You're going into the unknown. And so those two for me have always kind of helped keep me in some way I suppose, along a path that's got me from a professional and also a personal perspective. They've done well for me. So, yeah.
It's amazing. I think I was going to ask what advice would you have for people coming into the industry, but I think that's it, isn't it? It's you kind of have to have your values, have your beliefs, have your desired intentions, and get after it, and be willing to adapt along the way, but don't be beaten back and don't give up.
Yeah, 100%, Gareth. And look, over the last while, I am one of the best things. I suppose it was I stepping away from Worley. Was reading back through some of the notes that people have sent you on as you leave and depart the business. And there was a lot of people I took into the business that didn't have a renewable background, that had expertise in delivery of renewable energy projects. They had expertise in working with people. They had expertise in problem solving. But it was understanding how you create a team. And if you're looking for a unicorn, they don't exist. Yeah. And look, the sector is calling out for capable people. And if you think you can make an impact, you can make an impact. So don't second guess yourself. It's an incredible place to be involved in. It's, as I said, moving very, very fast, but globally we're moving quite slowly. So we're going to need to see a significant uplift in the projects. In order to do so, we need everyone pushing in the right direction. So I think anyone that wants to feel like they've made an impact at the end of their week, get involved in some element of renewable-based work. It is highly addictive and highly satisfying. And it's one where, you meet very like-minded people, and you can also meet people that are completely different spectrums altogether. One in particular, we've got a chap, Gareth, you know this gentleman. He's worked on all elements of mining projects and oil and gas projects. But what he brought in for us was a kind of a regimented approach in governance. And he challenged, he learned so much from us, but we learned so much from him. Mm-hmm. And it was it was kind of yin and yang. And this gentleman would go back to Australia and then come back over to the UK where we were based. And he was, he'd come back with news clippings of projects that he's reading about, and he's getting up to speed. So it was quite, no matter how far into your career you are, he's in semi-retirement, you can offer a significant amount. And he did for us. So he helped us align on a number of offshore wind projects, helped us secure, from a government's perspective, a big H2 green steel project. It's an incredible place to be working right now.
The thing, it came up in a previous conversation with another guest, but I've heard it here with you as well. Just a reminder to people that you also can do this within the organization that you're within. You can drive change, be a leader. You don't have to change companies to make an impact. I think that the intrapreneurial efforts can have just as much of an impact as others. And it sounds like you've been able to do that yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And look, your teammate, your colleague, Gareth Evans here has been one that's been doing that heavily. I'm aware of what Gareth's done. It's that ability to influence internally. I think that's actually the key element here. Previously we were having to try sell internally, sell externally, develop a team, deliver a project, create the business case internally. You're having to do these number of different things, a juggling act. Now it's becoming a bit easier. Now it's about bidding on a job because the business case is already there. And it's about convincing the company that they can deliver it. Whereas before it was convincing the company that they should be playing in this space, and then delivering it. I remember one project in particular. It was in East Timor. And we were looking at a solar project, a small scale solar project. There was batteries involved. And it was in East Timor. And the reason why we were getting involved in it was because the competition was low, but we needed to develop a resume. And I remember flying into East Timor, and I love travel. I love new environments. I love different cultures. But we're doing a public consultation in East Timor, and it was a pretty difficult audience. And it didn't help. I was really I had bad food poisoning. So it was a really bad environment, but I was internally selling, I was externally selling. And it was such a good experience because you come out a changed person because you understand, okay, this is what this environment needs to see. This is what internally need to see. So you start to understand that, okay, yeah, different approaches help you get to the finish line for different stakeholders. And it was understanding that stakeholder environment and getting it over the line.
And you mentioned before, and I'm really interested in this one because I think we've touched on people wanting to come into the industry, but there's business leaders around the world, and I think we're all collectively in agreement that we make change through business. Waiting for politicians and regulations will be waiting a lifetime. So we can make change through business. For the business leaders out there that are considering projects, they're seeing their energy costs going up, outages increasing, they need to hit emission reduction targets. What would you any advice for them where they maybe have never thought about energy ever? They're running a manufacturing facility or any business, how do they embrace the opportunity?
Look, I think one of the first things that one of the first elements that we started to roll out when I was in the consulting space was actually sitting down and helping them understand their alternatives.
Yeah.
And I suppose companies now are actually equally they're interested in challenging their status quo. The alternatives, whether it's connecting from renewables into their operation or looking at something completely different. The business cases, depending on the support mechanism within the country you're based in, there's a number of different scenarios here, and that can be easily adaptable. And it's about also, the vision that you want to adapt internally from an ESG perspective. For instance, Gareth, we're working with a steel manufacturer going completely green. We're working with a data center right now, converting out their entire business portfolio. We've been previously working with a number of refineries into the pharmaceutical space, where they're adopting, they're not just buying green credits, they're looking at executing and working with the development company to help deliver on that. And it's been very, very fortunate over the last while to have created a level of rapport with the end users as well as the developers. And in certain scenarios, we've been kind of linking them up, being matchmakers, and bringing these projects to fruition, So I think it is about just testing the business case. And there's plenty of consultants out there that can help you do so. I'm not going to do a sales pitch here, but it's understanding, what's the art of the possible, and sense checking it. Going back to your point earlier, what technology's come a long way since you and I started out in this space in Australia. It's come a massive way. You're looking at the price of solar. It's great. It's going down. Price of wind is great. It's going down. Batteries, it has its challenges depending on the location you're in. But it's comparably, as I said earlier, we've got the wind behind us. So it'd be naive of someone who has high operating costs to not look at this.
It's great. Love it. If you just to close us out, if you could encourage us to have anyone on the podcast, who would it be? Why? And what would you ask them? Yeah.
Hey, you know what? I started with Eddie O'Connor. I think you should actually look at Eddie O'Connor. He's been involved in a number of developments on the wind side, utility side, and I think he's actually going into the transmission side. So it's a good segue.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think he'd be a good guy to get in touch with.
Cool. That's great. Love that.
Nice one.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor. We for those, like, I'm not even sure that Dan knows this, but Eoghan and I we go back years, but we're like brothers who had never met, and we came together for a strategy session in Melbourne. We met early in the day. We jumped on some bikes. We rode around the Formula One track in Albert Park, Melbourne, Australia, as they were setting up. We hung out, we exercised, we strategized, and then we finished the night strong with cigars and martinis on a rooftop bar. So that's the best way to bond and come together and figure out how to solve the world's problems, and an extremely memorable time, and excited to have many more.
Dan, we brought up the term mega because it was called Make Energy Great Again.
Yeah.
So we rocked into the strategy session with hats for everyone, in true fashion, so we kind of
yes.
But it was
make a statement.
Yeah, no, it was indeed. Hey, Garrett, thanks for having me, and Dan, great to meet you. And
likewise,
best of luck. Cheers.
Appreciate you, Eoghan. Have a good one.
Thanks. Cheers. Talk to you guys.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.